When we talk about software architecture and you would like to act as a consultant, as you mentioned, for some legacy system, I don't think it's not only about software architecture, it's also about the team. So you architect for flow for sure. So
Oh,
if we didn't have the flexibility from the company of doing this, because as a software architect, I can guide the development team how they should build the software architecture. But again, team dynamics. We need team dynamics. How
oh,
can
right.
I convince the company that we need to, for example, restructure the org?
So one of the intersections we're talking about in our upcoming book is the intersection of architecture and team topologies. So uh, it's actually good that we have ammunition now in terms of the book Team Topologies, because it really describes. Now, Team Topologies is a bit biased toward domain driven design and microservices and modern distributed architectures, but it does a really good job of delineating some of the impacts that structure has on the way that you build things in your world. But a more general answer to your question is something that goes back to something I was saying earlier about an engineering approach. And one of my favorite things is demonstration defeats discussion. Stop talking about it. You're never going to convince anybody about by talking about we are misaligned as an organization. That's going to fall on deaf ears. You need to find evidence in your organization of how that's causing problems. So, for example, one of the common misfunctions that we see in organizations it's very common for organizations to seat people by job responsibility. All the presentation people sit in one place, all the data engineers sit in another place on a different floor, all the developers sit in another place on a different floor. And that actually makes sense in terms of Conway's law if you're building layered architectures with a presentation layer and a business rules layer and a data access layer. But if you're building something like microservices, all you're doing is creating a huge amount of interlayer communication between all those floors. And we've seen that cross-functional teams actually work much better, split the teams and responsibilities around the kind of thing that they're building. Well, I need evidence of this. And so now look at, to build a new feature in your organization, how many tickets does it take to build a new feature? If we're all sitting in different places versus how much would it take if we were all co-located, and create a co-located team and actually measure the amount of inter-team communication and what method it uses. And what you'll see is that by separating people by technical layers, you're creating a tremendous amount of communication overhead, which is really slowing down your software development process. It seems efficient to stick all the like people together in an organization, and it's certainly a lot easier to from the building manager standpoint. But you've got to measure what kind of impact is it having on productivity, and maybe even create pilots to try alternatives and measure those as well. It's much harder for organizations to argue against real data, particularly data derived from within your own organization.